Preface of Lorna Doone. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Rosanna Taranta. Lorna Doone by R.D. Blackmore. Preface. This work is called a romance because the incidents, characters, time, and scenery are alike romantic. And in shaping this old tale, the writer neither dares nor desires to claim for it the dignity or cumber it with the difficulty of an historic novel. And yet he thinks that the outlines are filled in more carefully, and the situations, however simple, more warmly colored and quickened than a reader would expect to find in what is called a legend. And he knows that any son of Exmoor, chancing on this volume, cannot fail to bring to mind the nurse tales of his childhood, the savage deeds of the outlaws Doones in the depth of Bagworthy forest, the beauty of the hapless maid brought up in the midst of them, the plain John Ridd's Herculean power, and, memory's too congenial food, the exploits of Tom Faggus, March 1869. End of preface. Chapter 1 of Lorna Doone. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Rosanna Taranta. Lorna Doone by R.D. Blackmore. Chapter 1. Elements of Education. If anybody cares to read a simple tale told simply, I, John Ridd of the parish of Oare, in the county of Somerset, yeoman and churchwarden, have seen and had a share in some doings of this neighbourhood, which I will try to set down in order, God sparing my life and memory. And they who light upon this book should bear in mind not only that I write for the clearing of our parish from ill fame and calumny, but also a thing which will, I trow, appear too often in it, to wit, that I am nothing more than a plain unlettered man, not read in foreign languages, as a gentleman might be, nor gifted with long words, even in mine own tongue, save what I may have won from the Bible, or Master William Shakespeare, whom, in the face of common opinion, I do value highly. In short, I am an ignoramus, but pretty well for a yeoman. My father being of good substance, at least as we reckon in Exmoor, and seized in his own right from many generations of one, and that the best and largest of the 3 farms into which our parish is divided, or rather the cultured part thereof, he, John Ridd the elder, churchwarden and overseer, being a great admirer of learning, and well able to write his name, sent me, his only son, to be schooled at Tiverton, in the county of Devon. For the chief boast of that ancient town, next to its woollen staple, is a worthy grammar school, the largest in the west of England, founded and handsomely endowed in the year 1604 by Master Peter Blundell, of that same place, clothier. Here, by the time I was 12 years old, I had risen into the upper school, and could make bold with Eutropus and Caesar by aid of an English version, and as much as 6 lines of Ovid. Some even said that I might, before manhood, rise almost to the 3rd form, being of a persevering nature, albeit, by full consent of all, except my mother, thick-headed. But that would have been, as I now perceive, an ambition beyond a farmer's son, for there is but one form above it, and that made of masterful scholars, entitled rightly monitors. So it came to pass, by the grace of God, that I was called away from learning, whilst sitting at the desk of the junior first in the upper school, and beginning the Greek verb phero. My eldest grandson makes bold to say that I never could have learned phero, 10 pages further on being all he himself could manage, with plenty of stripes to help him. I know that he hath more head than I, there never will he have such body, and am thankful to have stopped betimes with a meek and wholesome headpiece. But if you doubt of my having been there, because now I know so little, go and see my name, John Ridd, graven on that very form. Forsooth, from the time I was strong enough to open a knife and to spell my name, I began to grave it in the oak, first of the block whereupon I sate, and then of the desk in front of it, according as I was promoted from one to the other of them. And there my grandson reads it now, at this present time of writing, and hath fought a boy for scoffing at it. John Ridd his name, and done again in Winkies, a mischievous but cheerful device, in which we took great pleasure. This is the manner of a Winkie, which I here set down, lest child of mine, or grandchild, dare to make one on my premises. If he does, I shall know the mark at once, and score it well upon him. The scholar obtains by prayer or price a handful of saltpetre, and then, with the knife wherewith he should rather be trying to mend his pens, what does he do but scoop a hole where the desk is some 3 inches thick. This hole should be left with the middle exalted, and the circumfere dug more deeply. Then let him fill it with saltpetre, all save a little space in the midst where the boss of the wood is. Upon that boss, and it would be better if a splinter of timber rise upward, he sticks the end of his candle or tallow, or rat's tail as we called it, kindled and burning smoothly. Anon, as he reads by that light his lesson, lifting his eyes now and then it may be, the fire of candle lays hold of the petre with a spluttering noise and a leaping. Then should the pupil seize his pen, and regardless of the nib, stir bravely, and he will see a glow as of burning mountains, and a rich smoke, and sparks going merrily. Nor will it cease, if he stir wisely, and there be a good store of petre, until the wood is devoured through, like the sinking of a well shaft. Now well may it go with the head of a boy intent upon his primer, who betides to sit thereunder, but, above all things, have good care to exercise this art before the master strides up to his desk in the early grey of the morning. Other customs, no less worthy, abide in the school of Blundell, such as the singeing of nightcaps. But though they have a pleasant savour, and refreshing to think of, I may not stop to note them, unless it be that goodly one at the incoming of a flood. The schoolhouse stands beside a stream, not very large, called Lowman, which flows into the broad river of Exe about a mile below. This Lowman stream, although it be not fond of brawl and violence, in the manner of our Lynn, yet is wont to flood into a mighty head of waters when the storms of rain provoke it, and most of all when its little co-mate called the Taunton Brook, where I have plucked the very best cresses that ever man put salt on, comes foaming down like a great roan horse, and rears at the leap of the hedgerows. Then are the grey stone walls of Blundell on every side encompassed, the valleys spread over with looping waters, and it is a hard thing for the day boys to get home to their suppers. And in that time old Cop, the porter, so called because he hath copper boots to keep the wet from his stomach, and a nose of copper also, in right of other waters. His place is to stand at the gate, attending to the flood-boards grooved into one another, and so to watch the torrents rise and not be washed away. If it please God, he may help it. But long ere the flood hath attained this height, and while it is only waxing, certain boys of deputy will watch at the stoop of the drain holes, and be apt to look outside the walls when Cop is taking a cordial. And in the very front of the gate, just without the archway, where the ground is paved most handsomely, you may see in copy letters done a great P.B. of white pebbles. Now it is the custom and the law that when the invading waters, either fluxing along the wall from below the road bridge, or pouring sharply across the meadows from a cut called Owen's Ditch, and I myself have seen it come both ways, upon the very instant when the waxing element lips, though it be but a single pebble of the founder's letters, it is in the license of any boy, soever small and undoctrined, to rush into the great schoolrooms, where a score of masters sit heavily, and scream at the top of his voice, "P.B.!" Then with a yell the boys leap up, or break away from their standing. They toss their caps to the black-beamed roof, and haply the very books after them. And the great boys vex no more the small ones, and the small boys stick up to the great ones. One with another hard they go, to see the gain of the waters and the tribulation of Cop, and are prone to kick the day boys out, with words of scanty compliment. Then the masters look at one another, having no class to look to, and, boys being no more left to watch, in a manner they put their mouths up. With a spirited bang they close their books, and make invitation the one to the other for pipes and foreign cordials, recommending the chance of the time and the comfort away from cold water. But lo, I am dwelling on little things and the pigeon's eggs of the infancy, forgetting the bitter and heavy life gone over me since then. If I am neither a hard man nor a very close one, God knows I have had no lack of rubbing and pounding to make stone of me. Yet I cannot somehow believe that we ought to hate one another, to live far asunder, and block the mouth each of his little den, as do the wild beasts of the wood and the hairy outrangs, now brought over, each with a chain upon him. Let that matter be as it will, it is beyond me to unfold, and mayhap of my grandson's grandson. All I know is that wheat is better than when I began to sow it. End of chapter 1.
Chapter 2 of Lorna Doone. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Shirley Anderson. Lorna Doone by R.D. Blackmore. Chapter 2. An important item. Now the cause of my leaving Tiverton School, and the way of it, were as follows. On the 29th day of November, in the year of our Lord 1673, the very day when I was 12 years old, and had spent all my substance in sweetmeats, with which I made treat to the little boys, till the large boys ran in and took them, we came out of school at 5 o'clock, as the rule is upon Tuesdays. According to custom, we drove the day boys in brave rout down the causeway, from the school porch even to the gate where Cop has his dwelling and duty. Little it recked us, and helped them less, that they were our founder's citizens, and haply his own grandnephews, for he left no direct descendants. Neither did we much inquire what their lineage was, for it had long been fixed among us, who were of the house and chambers, that these same day boys were all cads, as we had discovered to call it, because they paid no groat for their schooling, and brought their own commons with them. In consumption of these we would help them, for our fare in hall fed appetite, and while we ate their victuals, we allowed them freely to talk to us. Nevertheless, we could not feel, when all the victuals were gone, but that these boys required kicking from the premises of Blundell. And some of them were shopkeepers' sons, young grocers, fellmongers, and poulterers, and these to their credit seemed to know how righteous it was to kick them. But others were of high family, as any need be in Devon, Carews and Bouchiers and bastards, and some of these would turn sometimes, and strike the boy that kicked them. But to do them justice, even these knew that they must be kicked for not paying. After these charity boys were gone, as in contumely we called them, "If you break my bag on my head," said one, "how will I feed thence to-morrow?" And after old Cop, with clang of iron, had jammed the double gates in under the scruff stone archway, whereupon are Latin verses, done in brass of small quality, some of us who were not hungry, and cared not for the supper bell, having sucked much parliament and dumps at my only charges, not that I ever bore much wealth, but because I had been thrifting it for this time of my birth, we were leaning quite at dusk against the iron bars of the gate, some 6 or it may be 7 of us, small boys all, and not conspicuous in the closing of the daylight and the fog that came at eventide, else Cop would have rated us up the green, for he was churly to the little boys when his wife had taken their money. There was plenty of room for all of us, for the gate will hold 9 boys close packed, unless they be fed rankly, whereof is little danger. And now we were looking out on the road, and wishing we could get there, hoping, moreover, to see a good string of pack horses come by, with troopers to protect them. For the day boys had brought us word that some intending their way to the town had lain that morning at Sandford Peveril, and must be in ere nightfall, because Mr. Faggus was after them. Now Mr. Faggus was my first cousin, and an honour to the family, being a North Malton man of great renown on the highway from Barham town even to London. Therefore, of course, I hoped that he would catch the packman, and the boys were asking my opinion, as of an oracle, about it. A certain boy leaning up against me would not allow my elbow room, and struck me very sadly in the stomach part, though his own was full of my parliament, and this I felt so unkindly that I smote him straightway in the face without tarrying to consider it, or weighing the question duly. Upon this he put his head down, and presented it so vehemently at the middle of my waistcoat, that for a minute or more my breath seemed drop, as it were, from my pockets, and my life seemed to stop from great want of ease. Before I came to myself again, it had been settled for us that we should move to the ironing box, as the triangle of turf is called, where the 2 causeways coming from the school porch and the hall porch meet, and our fights were mainly celebrated. Only we must wait until the convoy of horses had passed, and then make a ring by candlelight, and the other boys would like it. But suddenly there came round the post where the letters of our founder are, not from the way of Taunton, but from the side of Lomond Bridge, a very small string of horses, only 2 indeed, counting for one the pony, and a red-faced man on a bigger nag. "Praise ye, worshipful masters," he said, being feared of the gateway, "can't ye tell where our John Ridd be?" "Here a be is fey Jan Ridd," answered the sharp little chap, making a game of John Fry's language. "Zowen up, then," says John Fry, poking his whip through the bars at us. "Zowen up, and put un out." The other little chaps pointed at me, and some began to hallo, but I knew what I was about. "Oh, John, John," I cried, "what's the use of your coming now, and Peggy over the moors too, and it's so cruel cold for her? The holidays don't begin till Wednesday fortnight, John. To think of your not knowing that!" John Fry leaned forward in the saddle, and turned his eyes away from me, and there was a noise in his throat like a snail crawling on a window-pane. "Oh, us knows that well enough, Maister Jane. Reckon every man know that, without go to school like you doth. Your mother have kept all the apples up, and old Betty turned the black puddings, and none dare set trap for a blackbird. All for thee, lad, every bit of it now for thee." He checked himself suddenly, and frightened me. I knew that John Fry's way so well. And father, oh, how is father?" I pushed the boys right and left as I said it. "John, is father up in town? He used to come for me, and leave nobody else to do it." "Feyther'll be at the crooked post, t'other side of the telling house. Her couldn't lave house, by reason of the Christmas backen coming on, and some of the cider welted." The telling houses on the moor are rude cots where the shepherds meet to tell their sheep at the end of the pasturing season. He looked at the nag's ears as I said it, and, being up to John Fry's ways, I knew that it was a lie, and my heart fell like a lump of lead, and I leaned back on the stay of the gate, and longed no more to fight anybody. A sort of dull power hung over me, like the cloud of a brooding tempest, and I feared to be told anything. I did not even care to stroke the nose of my pony Peggy, although she pushed it in through the rails, where a square of broader lattice is, and sniffed at me, and began to crop gently after my fingers. But whatever lives or dies, business must be attended to, and the principal business of good Christians is, beyond all controversy, to fight with one another. "Come up, Jack," said one of the boys, lifting me under the chin. "He hit you, and you hit him, you know." "Pay your debts before you go," said a monitor, striding up to me after hearing how the honour lay. "Vid, you must go through with it." "Fight, for the sake of the junior first," cried the little fellow in my ear, the clever one, the head of our class, who had mocked John Fry, and knew all about the heirists, and tried to make me know it, but I never went more than 3 places up, and then it was an accident, and I came down after dinner. The boys were urgent round me to fight, though my stomach was not up for it, and being very slow of wit, which is not chargeable on me, I looked from one to other of them, seeking any cure for it. Not that I was afraid of fighting, for now I had been 3 years at Blundell's, and foughten, all that time, a fight at least once every week, till the boys began to know me. Only that the load on my heart was not as sprightly as of the hayfield. It is a very sad thing to dwell on, but even now, in my time of wisdom, I doubt it is a fond thing to imagine, and a motherly to insist upon, that boys can do without fighting, unless they be very good boys, and afraid of one another. "Nay," I said, with my back against the wrought iron stay of the gate, which was socketed into the copse house front, "I will not fight thee now, Robin Snell, but wait till I come back again." "Take coward's blow, Jack Ridd, then," cried half a dozen little boys, shoving Bob Snell forward to do it, because they all knew well enough, having striven with me ere now, and proved to be their master, they knew, I say, that without great charge I would never accept that contumely. But I took little heed of them, looking in dull wonderment at John Fry, and Smiler, and the blunderbuss, and Peggy. John Fry was scratching his head, I could see, and getting blue in the face, by the light of the copse parlour window, and going to and fro upon Smiler, as if he were hard set with it. And all the time he was looking briskly from my eyes to the fist I was clenching, and methought he tried to wink at me in a covert manner, and then Peggy whisked her tail. "Shall I fight, John?" I said at last. "I would an you had not come, John." "Christ will be done. I zim thee had better fight, Jan," he answered in a whisper, through the gridiron of the gate. "There be a dale of fighting avore thee. Best way to begin good tame like. Will the gentleman lat me in, to see as thee hast fair play, lad?" He looked doubtfully down at the colour of his cowskin boots, and the mire upon the horses, for the sloughs were exceedingly mucky. Peggy, indeed, my sorrel pony, being lighter of weight, was not crusted much over the shoulders, but Smiler, our youngest sledder, had been well in over his withers, and none would have deemed him a piebald, save of red mire and Blackmore. The great blunderbuss, moreover, was choked with a dollop of slough cake, and John Fry's sad-coloured Sunday hat was endued with a plume of marish weed. All this I saw while he was dismounting, heavily and wearily, lifting his leg from the saddle-cloth, as if with a sore crick in his back. By this time the question of fighting was gone quite out of our discretion, for sundry of the elder boys, grave and reverend signors, who had taken no small pleasure in teaching our hands to fight, to ward, to parry, to feign encounter, to lunge in the manner of sword-play, and the weaker child to drop on one knee when no cunning of fence might baffle the onset. These great masters of the art, who would far liefer see us little ones practise it than themselves engage, 6 or 7 of them had come running down the rounded causeway, having heard that there had arisen a snug little mill at the gate. Now whether that word hath origin in a Greek term meaning conflict, as the best read boys asseverated, or whether it is nothing more than a figure of similitude, from the beating arms of a mill, such as I have seen in counties where there are no water brooks, but folk make bread with wind, it is not for a man devoid of scholarship to determine. Enough that they who made the ring entitled the scene a mill, while we who must be thumped inside it tried to rejoice in their pleasantry, till it turned upon the stomach. Moreover, I felt upon me now a certain responsibility, a dutiful need to maintain, in the presence of John Fry, the manliness of the Ridd family, and the honour of Exmoor. Hitherto none had worsted me, although in the 3 years of my schooling I had fought more than 60 battles, and bedewed with blood every plant of grass towards the middle of the ironing box. And this success I owed at first to no skill of my own, until I came to know better, for up to 20 or 30 fights I struck as nature guided me, no wiser than a Father Longlegs in the heat of a lanthorn. But I had conquered, partly through my native strength, and the Exmoor toughness in me, and still more that I could not see when I had gotten my belly full. But now I was like to have that and more, for my heart was down, to begin with, and then Robert Snell was a bigger boy than I had ever encountered, and as thick in the skull and hard in the brain as even I could claim to be. I had never told my mother about these frequent strivings, because she was soft-hearted. Neither had I told my father, because he had not seen it. Therefore, beholding me, still an innocent-looking child, with fair curls on my forehead, and no store of bad language, John Fry thought this the very first fight that ever had befallen me, and so when they let him in at the gate, with a message to the headmasters, as one of the monitors told Cop, and Peggy and Smiler were tied to the railings, till I should be through my business, John comes up to me with the tears in his eyes, and says, "Don't 'ee go for to do it, Jan. Don't thee to do it for good now." But I told him that now it was much too late to cry off. So he said, "The Lord be with thee, Jan, and turn thy thumb knuckle inwards." It was not a very large piece of ground, in the angle of the causeways, but quite big enough to fight upon, especially for Christians, who loved to be cheek by jowl at it. The great boys stood in a circle around, being gifted with strong privilege, and the little boys had to leave to lie flat and look through the legs of the great boys. But while we were yet preparing, and the candles hissed in the fog cloud, old Phoebe, of more than 80 years, whose room was over the hall porch, came hobbling out, as she always did, to mar the joy of conflict. No one ever heeded her, neither did she expect it, but the evil was that 2 senior boys must always lose the first round of the fight, by having to lead her home again. I marvel how Robin Snell felt. Very likely he thought nothing of it, always having been a boy of a hectoring and unruly sort. But I felt my heart go up and down as the boys came round to strip me, and greatly fearing to be beaten, I blew hot upon my knuckles. Then pulled I off my little cut jerkin, and laid it down on my head cap, and over that my waistcoat, and a boy was proud to take care of them. Thomas Hooper was his name, and I remember how he looked at me. My mother had made that little cut jerkin in the quiet winter evenings, and taken pride to loop it up in a fashionable way, and I was loath to spoil it with blood, and good filberts were in the pocket. Then up to me came Robin Snell, Mayor of Exeter thrice since that, and he stood very square, and looking at me, and I lagged not long to look at him. Round his waist he had a kerchief busking up his small clothes, and on his feet light pumpkin shoes, and all his upper raiment off. And he danced about in a way that made my head swim on my shoulders, and he stood some inches over me. But I, being muddled with much doubt about John Fry and his errand, was only stripped of my jerkin and waistcoat, and not comfortable to begin. "Come now, shake hands," cried a big boy, jumping in joy of the spectacle. A third foreman, nearly 6 feet high. "Shake hands, you little devils. Keep your pluck up, and show good sport, and Lord love the better man of you." Robin took me by the hand, and gazed at me disdainfully, then smote me painfully in the face ere I could get my fence up. "What be 'bout, lad?" cried John Fry. "Hutton again, Jan, will 'ee? Well done, then, our Jan boy." For I had replied to Robin now, with all the weight and cadence of a penthemimmoral caesura, a thing, the name of which I know, but could never make head nor tail of it. And the strife began in a serious style, and the boys looking on were not cheated. Although I could not collect their shouts when the blows were ringing upon me, it was no great loss, for John Fry told me afterwards that their oaths went up like a furnace fire. But to these we paid no heed or hap, being in the thick of swinging, and devoid of judgment. All I know is, I came to my corner, when the round was over, with very hard pumps in my chest, and a great desire to fall away. "Time is up," cried head monitor, ere ever I got my breath again, and when I fain would have lingered a while on the knee of the boy that held me. John Fry had come up, and the other boys were laughing because he wanted a stable lanthorn, and threatened to tell my mother. "Time is up," cried another boy, more headlong than head monitor. "If we count 3 before the come of thee, Thwack thou art, and must go to the women. I felt it hard upon me. He began to count. 1, 2, 3, but before the 3 was out of his mouth, I was facing my foe, with both hands up, and my breath going rough and hot, and resolved to wait the turn of it. For I had found seat on the knee of a boy sage, and skill to tutor me, who knew how much the end very often differs from the beginning. A rare ripe scholar he was, and now he hath rooted up the Germans in the matter of criticism. Sure the clever boys and men have most love towards the stupid ones. "Finish him off, Bob," cried a big boy, and that I noticed especially, because I thought it unkind of him, after eating of my toffee as he had that afternoon. "Finish him off, neck and crop. He deserves it for sticking up to a man like you." But I was not so to be finished off, though feeling in my knuckles now as if it were a blueness and a sense of chilblain. Nothing held except my legs, and they were good to help me. So this bout, or round, if you please, was foughten warily by me, with gentle recollection of what my tutor, the clever boy, had told me, and some resolve to earn his praise before I came back to his knee again. And never, I think, in all my life, sounded sweeter words in my ears, except when my love loved me, than when my second and backer, who had made himself part of my doings now, and would have wept to see me beaten, said, "Famously done, Jack, famously! Only keep your wind up, Jack, and you'll go right through him." Meanwhile John Fry was prowling about, asking the boys what they thought of it, and whether I was like to be killed, because of my mother's trouble. But finding now that I had foughten 80 fights already, he came up to me woefully, in the quickness of my breathing, while I sat on the knee of my second, with a piece of spongious coralline to ease me of my bloodshed, and he says in my ears, as if he were clapping spurs into a horse, "Never thee knack under, Jan, or never come nae Exmoor no more." With that it was all up with me. A simmering buzzed in my heavy brain, and a light came through my eye places. At once I set both fists again, and my heart stuck to me like cobbler's wax. Either Robin Snell should kill me, or I would conquer Robin Snell. So I went in again with my courage up, and Bob smiling for victory, and I hated him for smiling. He let me with his left hand, and I gave him my right between his eyes, and he blinked and was not pleased with it. I feared him not, and spared him not, neither spared myself. My breath came again, and my heart stood cool, and my eyes struck fire no longer. Only I knew that I would die sooner than shame my birthplace. How the rest of it was, I know not, only that I had the end of it, and helped to put Robin in bed. End of chapter 2.
Of Lorna Doone. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Shirley Anderson. Lorna Doone by R.D. Blackmore. Chapter 3. The Warpath of the Doones. From Tiverton town to the town of Oare is a very long and painful road, and in good truth the traveller must make his way, as the saying is, for the way is still unmade, at least on this side of Dulverton, although there is less danger now than in the time of my schooling, for now a good horse may go there without much cost of leaping, but when I was a boy the spurs would fail, when needed most, by reason of the slough cake. It is to the credit of this age, and our advance upon fatherly ways, that we have now laid down rods and faggots, and even stump oaks here and there, so that a man in good daylight need not sink if he be quite sober. There is nothing I have striven at more than doing my duty way warden over Exmoor. But in those days when I came from school, and good times they were too, full of a warmth and fine hearth comfort, which are now dying out, it was a sad and sorry business to find where lay the highway. We are taking now to mark it off with a fence on either side, at least when a town is handy. But to me this seems of a high pretence, and a sort of landmark and channel for robbers, though well enough near London, where they have earned a racecourse. We left the town of the two fords, which they say is the meaning of it, very early in the morning, after lying one day to rest, as was demanded by the nags, sore of foot and foundered. For my part too, I was glad to rest, having aches all over me, and very heavy bruises, and we lodged at the sign of the White Horse Inn, in the street called Gold Street, opposite where the souls are of John and Joan Greenway, set up in gold letters, because we must take the homeward way at cockcrow of the morning. Though still John Fry was dry with me of the reason of his coming, and only told lies about father, and could not keep them agreeable, I hoped for the best, as all boys will, especially after a victory, and I thought perhaps father had sent for me because he had a good harvest, and the rats were bad in the corn chamber. It was high noon before we got to Dulverton that day, near to which town the river Exe and its big brother Barle have union. My mother had an uncle living there, but we were not to visit his house this time, at which I was somewhat astonished, for we needs must stop for at least 2 hours, to bait our horses thorough well, before coming to the Black Bog way. The bogs are very good in frost, except where the hot springs rise, but as yet there had been no frost this year, save just enough to make the blackbirds look big in the morning. In a hearty black frost they look small, until the snow falls over them. The road from Bampton to Dulverton had not been very delicate, yet nothing to complain of much, no deeper indeed than the hocks of a horse, except in the rotten places. The day was inclined to be mild and foggy, and both nags sweated freely, but Peggy, carrying little weight, for my wardrobe was upon Smiler, and John Fry grumbling always, we could easily keep in front, as far as you may hear a laugh. John had been rather bitter with me, which methought was a mark of ill taste at coming home for the holidays, and yet I made allowance for John, because he had never been to school, and never would have chanced to eat Fry upon condition of spelling it. Therefore I rode on, thinking that he was hard set, like a saw, for his dinner, and would soften after tooth work. And yet at his most hungry times, when his mind was far gone upon bacon, certes he seemed to check himself, and look at me as if he were sorry for little things coming over great. But now at Dulverton we dined upon the rarest and choicest victuals that ever I did taste. Even now at my time of life to think of it gives me appetite, as once and a while to think of my first love makes me love all goodness. Hot mutton pastry was a thing I had often heard of from very wealthy boys and men, who made a dessert of dinner, and to hear them talk of it made my lips smack, and my ribs come inwards. And now John Fry strode into the hostel, with the air and grace of a short-legged man, and shouted as loud as if he were calling sheep upon Exmoor. "Hot mutton pastry for 2 travellers, and number 5, in 5 minutes, dishing up in the tin with the gravy, same as I hardered last Tuesday." Of course it did not come in 5 minutes, nor yet in 10 or 20, but that made it all the better when it came to the real presents, and the smell of it was enough to make an empty man thank God for the room there was inside him. 50 years have passed me quicker than the taste of that gravy. It is in the manner of all good boys to be careless in apparel, and take no pride in adornment. Good lack, if I see a boy make do about the fit of his crumpler, and the creasing of his breeches, and desire to be shod for the comeliness rather than for use, I cannot scape the mark that God took thought to make a girl of him. Not so when they grow older, and court the regard of the maidens. Then may the bravery pass from the inside to the outside of them, and no bigger fools are they, even then, than their fathers were before them. But God forbid any man to be a fool to love, and be loved as I have been, else would he have prevented it. When the mutton pasty was done, and Peggy and Smiler had dined well also, out I went to wash at the pump, being a lover of soap and water, at all risk, except of my dinner. And John Fry, who cared very little to wash, save Sabbath days, in his own soap, and who had kept me from the pump by threatening loss of the dish, out he came in a satisfied manner, with a piece of quill in his hand, to lean against a door-post, and listen to the horses feeding, and have his teeth ready for supper. Then a lady's maid came out, and the sun was on her face, and she turned round to go back again, but put a better face upon it, and gave a trip and hitched her dress, lest the hostlers should laugh that she was losing her complexion. With a long Italian glass in her fingers very daintily, she came up to the pump in the middle of the yard, where I was running the water off all my head and shoulders, and arms, and some of my breast even, and though I had glimpsed her through the sprinkle, it gave me quite a turn to see her, child as I was, in my open aspect. But she looked at me no whit abashed, making a baby of me no doubt, as a woman of 30 will do, even with a very big boy when they catch him on a hayrick. And she said to me in a brazen manner, as if I had been nobody, while I was shrinking behind the pump, and craving to get my shirt on, "Good leetle boy, come hither to me. Fine heaven, how blue your eyes are, and your skin like snow! But some naughty man has beaten it black. Oh, leetle boy, let me feel it. Ah, how then it must have hurt you! There now, and you shall love me." All this time she was touching my breast here and there, very lightly, with her delicate brown fingers, and I understood from her voice and manner that she was not of this country, but a foreigner by extraction. And then I was not so shy of her, because I could talk better English than she, and yet I longed for my jerkin, and liked not to be rude to her. "If you please, madam, I must go. John Fry is waiting by the tapster's door, and Peggy neighing to me. If you please, we must get home to night, and father will be waiting for me this side of the telling house." "There, there, you shall go, little dear, and perhaps I will go after you. I have taken much love of you. But the Baroness is hard to me. How far you call it now to the bank of the sea at at Watchet likely you mean, madam. Oh, a very long way, and the road's as soft as the road to Oare." "Oh ah, I shall remember, that is the place where my little boy live, and some day I will come seek for him. Now to make the pump flow, my dear, and give me the good water. The Baroness will not touch unless a nebule be formed outside the glass." I did not know what she meant by that, yet I pumped for her very heartily, and marvelled to see her for 50 times throw the water away in the trough, as if it was not good enough. At last the water suited her, with the likeness of fog outside the glass, and the gleam of a crystal underneath it, and then she made a curtsy to me, in a sort of mocking manner, holding the long glass by the foot, not to take the cloud off, and then she wanted to kiss me, but I was out of breath, and have always been shy of that work, except when I come to offer it, and so I ducked under the pump handle, and she knocked her chin on the knob of it, and the hostlers came out and asked whether they would do as well. Upon this she retreated up the yard, with a certain dark dignity and a foreign way of walking, which stopped them at once from going farther, because it was so different from the fashion of their sweethearts. One with another they hung back, where half a cartload of hay was, and they looked to be sure that she would not turn round, and then each one laughed at the rest of them. Now up to the end of Dulverton town, on the northward side of it, where the 2 new pigsties be, the Oare folk and the Watchet folk must trudge on together, until we come to a broken cross, where a murdered man lies buried. Peggy and Smiler went up the hill, as if nothing could be too much for them, after the beans they had eaten, and suddenly turning a corner of trees, we happened upon a great coach, and 6 horses labouring very heavily. John Fry rode on with his hat in his hand, as became him towards the quality, but I was amazed to that degree that I left my cap on my head, and drew bridle without knowing it. For in the front seat of the coach, which was half way open, being of the city make, and the day in want of air, sate the foreign lady, who had met me at the pump and offered to salute me. By her side was a little girl, dark-haired and very wonderful, with a wealthy softness on her, as if she must have her own way. I could not look at her for 2 glances, and she did not look at me for one, being such a little child, and busy with the hedges. But in the honourable place sate a handsome lady, very warmly dressed, and sweetly delicate of colour, and close to her was a lively child, 2 or it may be 3 years old, bearing a white cockade in his hat, and staring at all and everybody. Now he saw Peggy, and took such a liking to her, that the lady his mother, if so she were, was forced to look at my pony and me. And to tell the truth, although I am not one of those who adore the high folk, she looked at us very kindly, and with a sweetness rarely found in the women who milk the cows for us. Then I took off my cap to the beautiful lady, without asking wherefore, and she put up her hand and kissed it to me, thinking perhaps that I looked like a gentle and good little boy, for folk have always called me innocent, though God knows I was never that. But now the foreign lady, or lady's maid as it might be, who had been busy with the little dark eyes, turned upon all this going on, and looked me straight in the face. I was about to salute her at a distance, indeed, and not with the nicety she had offered me, but strange to say she stared at my eyes as if she had never seen me before, neither wished to see me again. At this I was so startled, such things being out of my knowledge, that I startled Peggy also with the muscle of my legs, and she being fresh from stable, and the mire scraped off with the cask hoop, broke away so suddenly that I could do no more than turn round and lower my cap, now 5 months old, to the beautiful lady. Soon I overtook John Fry, and asked him all about them, and how it was that we had missed their starting from the hostel. But John would never talk much till after a gallon of cider, and all that I could win out of him was that they were murdering papishers, or the devil, as they came from, and a good thing for me and a providence that I was gone down to Dulverton town to buy sweetstuff for Annie, else my stupid head would have gone astray with their great outcoming. We saw no more of them after that, but turned into the sideway, and soon had the fill of our hands and eyes to look to our own going, for the road got worse and worse until there was none at all, and perhaps the purest thing it could do was to be ashamed to show itself. But we pushed on as best we might, with doubt of reaching home any time, except by special grace of God. The fog came down upon the moors as thick as ever I saw it, and there was no sound of any sort, nor a breath of wind to guide us. The little stubby trees that stand out here and there, like bushes with a wooden leg to them, were drizzled with a mess of wet, and hung their points with dropping. Wherever the butt end of a hedgerow came up from the hollow ground, like the withers of a horse, holes of a splash were pocked and pimpled in the yellow sand of conies, or under the dwarf trees' ovens. But soon it was too dark to see that, or anything else, I may say, except the creases in the dusk, where prisoned light crept up to the valleys. After a while, even that was gone, and no other comfort left us except to see our horses' heads jogging to their footsteps, and the dark ground pass below us, lighter where the wet was, and then the splash, foot after foot, more clever than we can do it, and the orderly jerk of the tail, and the smell of what a horse is. John Fry was bowing forward with sleep upon his saddle, and now I could no longer see the frizzle of wet upon his beard, for he had a very brave one of a bright red colour, and trimmed into a whale oil knot, because he was newly married, although that comb of hair had been a subject of some wonder to me, whether I in God's good time should have the like of that, handsomely set with shining beads, small above and large below, from the weeping of heaven. But still I could see the jog of his hat, a Sunday hat with a top to it, and some of his shoulder bowed out in the mist, so that one could say, "Hold up, John," when Smiler put his foot in. "Mercy of God, where be us now?" said John Fry, waking suddenly. "Us ought to have passed Holdhash, Jan. Zeen it on the road, have 'ee?" "No, indeed, John, nor old Ash, nor nothing else to my knowing, nor heard nothing, save thee snoring." "What a vool thee must be, then, Jan, and mesel no better. Hearken, lad, hearken." We drew up our horses and listened, through the thickness of the air, and with our hands laid to our ears. At first there was nothing to hear, except the panting of the horses, and the trickle of the eaving drops from our head covers and clothing, and the soft sounds of the lonely night, that made us feel and try not to think. Then there came a mellow noise, very low and mournsome, not a sound to be afraid of, but to long to know the meaning, with a soft rise of the hair. 3 times it came and went again, as if the shaking of a thread might pass away into the distance, and then I touched John Fry to know that there was something near me. "Don't 'ee be a fool, John. Vain music as iver I hear. God bless the man as made undo it." "Have they hanged one of the Doones then, John?" "Never talk like of thiccy. Hang a Doone, God knoweth the king would hang pretty quick if her did." "Then who is it in the chains, John?" I felt my spirit rise as I asked, for now I had crossed Exmoor so often as to hope that the people sometimes deserved it, and think that it might be a lesson to the rogues who unjustly loved the mutton they were never born to. But of course they were born to hanging, when they set themselves so high. "It be norbody," said John, "for us to make a fush about. Belong to t'other side of the moor, and come stealing our shape to our side. Red Jem Hannaford his name. Thank God for him to be hanged, lad, and good cess to his soul for quaking so." So the sound of the quiet swinging led us very modestly, as it came and went on the wind, loud and low pretty regularly, even as far as the foot of the gibbet, where the 4 crossways are. "Vamous job this 'ere," cried John, looking up to be sure of it, because there were so many. "Here be my own nick on the post. Red Jem too, and no doubt of him. He do hang so handsome like, and his ribs up like a horse almost. God bless them as discovered the way to make a rogue so useful. Good night to thee, Jem, my lad, and not break thy dreams with the quaking." John Fry shook his bridle arm, and smote upon Smiler merrily as he jogged into the homeward track from the guiding of the body. But I was sorry for Red Jem, and wanted to know more about him, and whether he might not have avoided this miserable end, and what his wife and children thought of it, if, indeed, he had any. But John would talk no more about it, and perhaps he was moved with a lonesome feeling, as the creaking sound came after us. "Hold thee tongue, lad," he said sharply. "Us be nigh the Doone track now, 2 mile from Dunkery Beacon Hill, the highest point of Exmoor. So happen they be abroad to night. Us must crawl on our belly places, boy." I knew at once what he meant. Those bloody Doones of Bagworthy, the awe of all Devon and Somerset. Outlaws, traitors, murderers. My little legs began to tremble to and fro upon Peggy's sides, as I heard the dead robber in chains behind us, and thought of the live ones still in front. "But John," I whispered warily, sidling close to his saddle bow, "dear John, you don't think they will see us in such a fog as this?" "Never God made a fog as could stop their eyesen," he whispered in answer fearfully. "Here us be by the hollow ground. Zober, lad, go zober now, if thee wish to see thy mother." For I was inclined, in the manner of boys, to make a run of the danger, and cross the Doone track at full speed, to rush for it and be done with it. But even then I wondered why he talked of my mother so, and said not a word of father. We were come to a long deep goyle, as they call it on Exmoor, a word whose fountain and origin I have nothing to do with. Only I know that when little boys laughed at me at Tiverton for talking about a goyle, the big boy clouted them on the head, and said that it was in Homer, and meant the hollow of the hand. And another time a Welshman told me that it must be something like the thing they call a pant in those parts. Still, I know what it means well enough, to wit, a long trough, among wild hills, falling towards the plain country, rounded at the bottom perhaps, and stiff, more than steep, at the sides of it. Whether it be straight or crooked makes no difference to it. We rode very carefully down our side, and through the soft grasses at the bottom, and all the while we listened as if the air was a speaking trumpet. Then gladly we breasted our nags to the rise, and were coming to the comb of it, when I heard something, and caught John's arm, and he bent his hand to the shape of his ear. It was the sound of horses' feet knocking up through splashy ground, as if the bottom sucked them. Then a grunting of weary men, and the lifting noise of stirrups, and sometimes the clank of iron mixed with the wheezy croning of leather, and the blowing of hairy nostrils. "God's sake, Jack, slip round her belly, and let her go where she wull." As John Fry whispered, so I did, for he was off Smiler by this time. But our 2 pads were too fagged to go far, and began to nose about and crop, sniffing more than they need have done. I crept to John's side very softly with the bridle on my arm. "Let goo, Bradle, let goo, lad. Plaise God they take them for forest ponies, or they'll zend a bullet through us." I saw what he meant, and let go of the bridle, for now the mist was rolling off, and we were against the skyline to the dark cavalcade below us. John lay on the ground by a barrow of heather, where a little gullet was, and I crept up to him, afraid of the noise I made in dragging my legs along, and the creak of my cord breeches. John bleated like a sheep to cover it, a sheep very cold and trembling. Then just as the foremost horseman passed, scarce 20 yards below us, a puff of wind came up the glen, and the fog rolled off before it, and suddenly a strong red light, cast by the cloud weight downwards, spread like fingers over the moorland, opened the alleys of darkness, and hung on the steel of the riders. "Dunkery Beacon," whispered John, so close into my ear that I felt his lips and teeth ashake. Didn't fire it now except to show the Doones way home again, since the night as they went up and throwed the watchman atop it. Why, what be about, lad? God's sake!" For I could keep still no longer, but wriggled away from his arm, and along the little gullet, still going flat on my breast and thighs, until I was under a grey patch of stone, with a fringe of dry fern around it. There I lay, scarce 20 feet above the heads of the riders, and I feared to draw my breath, though prone to do it with wonder. For now the beacon was rushing up in a fiery storm to heaven, and the form of its flame came and went in the folds, and the heavy sky was hovering. All around it was hung with red, deep in twisted columns, and then a great beard of fire streamed throughout the darkness. The sullen hills were flanked with light, and the valleys chined with shadow, and all the sombrous moors between awoke in furrowed anger. But most of all the flinging fire leaped into the rocky mouth of the glen below me, where the horsemen passed in silence, scarcely deigning to look round. Heavy men and large of stature, reckless how they bore their guns, or how they sate their horses, with leathern jerkins, and long boots, and iron plates on breast and head, plunder heaped behind their saddles, and flagons slung in front of them. I counted more than 30 pass, like clouds upon red sunset. Some had carcasses of sheep swinging with their skins on, other had deer, and one had a child flung across his saddle bow. Whether the child were dead or alive was more than I could tell, only it hung head downwards there, and must take the chance of it. They had got the child, a very young one, for the sake of the dress, no doubt, which they could not stop to pull off from it, for the dress shone bright where the fire struck it, as if with gold and jewels. I longed in my heart to know most sadly what they would do with the little thing, and whether they would eat it. It touched me so to see that child, a prey among those vultures, that in my foolish rage and burning I stood up and shouted to them, leaping on a rock, and raving out of all possession. 2 of them turned round, and one set his carbine at me, but the other said it was but a pixie, and bade him to keep his powder. Little they knew, and less thought I, that the pixie then before them would dance their castle down one day. John Fry, who in the spring of fight had brought himself down from Smiler's side, as if he were dipped in oil, now came up to me, all risk being over, cross and stiff, and aching sorely from his wet couch of heather. "Small thanks to thee, Janet, as my new wife bain't a wedder. And who be you to support of her, and her son if she have one? Zarve thee right if I was to chuck thee down in the Doone track. Zim thee'll come to un, sooner or later, if this be the zample of thee." And that was all he had to say, instead of thanking God. For if ever born man was in a fright, and ready to thank God for anything, the name of that man was John Fry, not more than 5 minutes agone. However, I answered nothing at all, except to be ashamed of myself, and soon we found Peggy and Smiler and company, well embarked on the homeward road, and victualling where the grass was good. Right glad they were to see us again, not for the pleasure of carrying, but because a horse, like a woman, lacks, and is better without, self-reliance. My father never came to meet us at either side of the telling house, neither at the crooked post, nor even at the home linhay, although the dogs kept such a noise that he must have heard us. Home side of the linhay, and under the ashen hedgerow, where father taught me to catch blackbirds, and all at once my heart went down, and all my breast was hollow. There was not even a lanthorn light on the peg against the cow's house, and nobody said "Hold your noise" to the dogs, or shouted "Here our Jack is." I looked at the posts of the gate, in the dark, because they were tall, like father, and then at the door in the harness room, where he used to smoke his pipe and sing. Then I thought he had guests perhaps, people lost upon the moors, whom he could not leave unkindly, even for his son's sake. And yet about that I was jealous, and ready to be vexed with him, when he should begin to make much of me, and I felt in my pocket for the new pipe which I had brought him from Tiverton, and said to myself, "He shall not have it until to-morrow morning." Woe is me, I cannot tell. How I knew I know not now, only that I slunk away without a tear or thought of weeping, and hid me in a saw-pit. There the timber overhead come like streaks across me, and all I wanted was to lack, and none to tell me anything. By and by a noise came down, as of woman's weeping, and there my mother and sister were, choking and holding together, Although they were my dearest loves, I could not bear to look at them until they seemed to want my help, and put their hands before their eyes. End of Chapter 3. Recording by Shirley Anderson.
Chapter 4 of Lorna Doone. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Michelle Harris. Lorna Doone by R.D. Blackmore. Chapter 4. A Very Rash Visit. My dear father had been killed by the Doones of Bagworthy, while riding home from Porlock Market on the Saturday evening. With him were 6 brother farmers, all of them very sober, for father would have no company with any man who went beyond half a gallon of beer or a single gallon of cider. The robbers had no grudge against him, for he had never flouted them, neither made overmuch of outcry, because they robbed other people. For he was a man of such strict honesty and due parish feeling, that he knew it to be every man's own business to defend himself and his goods, unless he belonged to our parish, and then we must look after him. These 7 good farmers were jogging along, helping one another in the troubles of the road, and singing goodly hymns and songs to keep their courage moving, when suddenly a horseman stopped in the starlight full across them. By dress and arms they knew him well, and by his size and stature, shown against the glimmer of the evening star; and though he seemed one man to 7, it was in truth one man to 1. Of the 6 who had been singing songs and psalms about the power of God and their own regeneration, such psalms as went the round in those days of the public houses, there was not one but pulled out his money and sang small beer to a Doone. But father had been used to think that any man who was comfortable inside his own coat and waistcoat deserved to have no other set, unless he would strike a blow for them. And so, while his gossips doffed their hats and shook with what was left of them, he set his staff above his head and rode at the Doone robber. With a trick of his horse the wild man escaped the sudden onset, although it must have amazed him sadly that any durst resist him. Then when Smiler was carried away with the dash and the weight of my father, not being brought up to battle, nor used to turn, save in the plough harness, the outlaw whistled upon his thumb, and plundered the rest of the yeomen. But father, drawing at Smiler's head, to try to come back and help them, was in the midst of a dozen men, who seemed to come out of a turf rick, some on horse and some afoot. Nevertheless he smote lustily, so far as he could see, and being of great size and strength, and his blood well up, they had no easy job with him. With the play of his wrist he cracked 3 or 4 crowns, being always famous at singlestick, until the rest drew their horses away, and he thought that he was master, and would tell his wife about it. But a man beyond the range of staff was crouching by the peat stack, with a long gun set to his shoulder, and he got poor father against the sky, and I cannot tell the rest of it. Only they knew that Smiler came home, with blood upon his withers, and father was found in the morning dead on the moor, with his ivy-twisted cudgel lying broken under him. Now whether this were an honest fight, God judge betwixt the Doones and me. It was more of woe than wonder, being such days of violence, that mother knew herself a widow, and her children fatherless. Of children there were only 3, none of us fit to be useful yet, only to comfort mother, by making her to work for us. I, John Ridd, was the eldest, and felt it a heavy thing on me. Next came sister Annie, with about 2 years between us, and then the little Eliza. Now, before I got home and found my sad loss, and no boy ever loved his father more than I loved mine, mother had done a most wondrous thing, which made all the neighbours say that she must be mad at least. Upon the Monday morning, while her husband lay unburied, she cast a white hood over her hair, and gathered a black cloak round her, and taking counsel of no one, set off on foot for the Doone gate. In the early afternoon she came to the hollow and barren entrance, where in truth there was no gate, only darkness to go through. If I get on with this story, I shall have to tell of it by and by, as I saw it afterwards, and will not dwell there now. Enough that no gun was fired at her, only her eyes were covered over, and somebody led her by the hand, without any wish to hurt her. A very rough and headstrong road was all that she remembered, for she could not think as she wished to do, with the cold iron pushed against her. At the end of this road they delivered her eyes, and she could scarce believe them. For she stood at the head of a deep green valley, carved from out the mountains in a perfect oval, with a fence of sheer rock standing round it, 80 feet or 100 high, from whose brink black wooded hills swept up to the skyline. By her side a little river glided out from underneath with a soft dark babble, unawares of daylight, then growing brighter, lapsed away and fell into the valley. Then, as it ran down the meadow, alders stood on either marge, and grass was blading out upon it, and yellow tufts of rushes gathered, looking at the hurry. But further down, on either bank, were covered houses built of stone, square and roughly cornered, set as if the brook were meant to be the street between them. Only 1 room high they were, and not placed opposite each other, but in and out as skittles are. Only that the first of all, which proved to be the captain's, was a sort of double house, or rather 2 houses joined together by a plank bridge over the river. 14 cots my mother counted, all very much of a pattern, and nothing to choose between them, unless it were the captain's. Deep in the quiet valley there, away from noise and violence and brawl, save that of the rivulet, any man would have deemed them homes of simple mind and innocence. Yet not a single house stood there but was the home of murder. 2 men led my mother down a steep and glittery stairway, like the ladder of a haymow, and thence from the break of the falling water as far as the house of the captain. And there at the door they left her trembling, strung as she was, to speak her mind. Now, after all, what right had she, a common farmer's widow, to take it amiss that men of birth thought fit to kill her husband? And the Doones were of very high birth, as all we clods of Exmoor knew, and we had enough of good teaching now, let any man say the contrary, to feel that all we had belonged of right to those above us. Therefore my mother was half ashamed that she could not help complaining. But after a while, as she said, remembrance of her husband came, and the way he used to stand by her side, and put his strong arm round her, and how he liked his bacon fried, and praised her kindly for it. And so the tears were in her eyes, and nothing should gainsay them. A tall old man, Sir Ensor Doone, came out with a bill-hook in his hand, hedger's gloves going up his arms, as if he were no better than a labourer at ditch work. Only in his mouth and eyes, his gait, and most of all his voice, even a child could know and feel that here was no ditch labourer. Good cause he has found since then, perhaps, to wish that he had been one. With his white locks moving upon his coat, he stopped and looked down at my mother, and she could not help herself but curtsy under the fixed black gazing. "Good woman, you are none of us. Who has brought you hither? Young men must be young, but I have had too much of this work." And he scowled at my mother for her comeliness, and yet looked under his eyelids as if he liked her for it. But as for her, in her depth of love grief, it struck scorn upon her womanhood, and in the flash she spoke. "What you mean I know not. Traitors, cutthroats, cowards! I am here to ask for my husband." She could not say any more, because her heart was now too much for her, coming hard in her throat and mouth, but she opened up her eyes at him. "Madam," said Sir Ensor Doone, being born a gentleman, although a very bad one, "I crave pardon of you. My eyes are old, or I might have known. Now, if we have your husband prisoner, he shall go free without ransoms, because I have insulted you." "Sir," said my mother, being suddenly taken away with sorrow, because of his gracious manner, "please to let me cry a bit." He stood away, and seemed to know that women want no help for that, and by the way she cried, he knew that they had killed her husband. Then, having felt of grief himself, he was not angry with her, but left her to begin again. "Loath would I be," said mother, sobbing with her new red handkerchief, and looking at the pattern of it, "loath indeed, Sir Ensor Doone, to accuse any one unfairly. But I have lost the very best husband God ever gave to a woman. And I knew him when he was to your belt, and I not up to your knee, sir. And never an unkind word he spoke, nor stopped me short in speaking. All the herbs he left to me, and all the bacon curing, and when it was best to kill a pig, and how to treat the maidens. Not that I would ever wish. Oh, John, it seems so strange to me, and last week you were everything." Here mother burst out crying again, not loudly, but turning quietly, because she knew that no one now would ever care to wipe the tears. And 50 or 100 things, of weekly and daily happening, came across my mother, so that her spirit fell like slackening lime. "This matter must be seen to. It shall be seen to at once," the old man answered, moved a little in spite of all his knowledge. "Madam, if any wrong has been done, trust the honour of a Doone. I will redress it to my utmost. Come inside and rest yourself, while I ask about it. What was your good husband's name, and when and where fell this mishap?" "Deary me," said mother, as he set a chair for her, very polite, but she would not sit upon it. "Saturday morning I was a wife, sir, and Saturday night I was a widow, and my children fatherless. My husband's name was John Ridd, sir, as everybody knows, and there was not a finer or better man in Somerset or Devon. He was coming home from Porlock market, and a new gown for me on the crupper, and a shell to put my hair up. Oh, John, how good you were to me!" Of that she began to think again, and not to believe her sorrow, except as a dream from the evil one, because it was too bad upon her; and perhaps she would awake in a minute, and her husband would have the laugh of her. And so she wiped her eyes and smiled, and looked for something. "Madam, this is a serious thing," Sir Ensor Doone said graciously, and showing grave concern. "My boys are a little wild, I know. And yet I cannot think that they would willingly harm any one. And yet you do look wronged. Send Counsellor to me," he shouted, from the door of his house. And down the valley went the call, "Send Counsellor to Captain." Counsellor Doone came in ere yet my mother was herself again. And if any sight could astonish her when all her sense of right and wrong was gone astray with the force of things, it was the sight of the Counsellor. A square-built man of enormous strength, but a foot below the Doone stature, which I shall describe hereafter. He carried a long gray beard descending to the leather of his belt. Great eyebrows overhung his face like ivy on a pollard oak, and under them 2 large brown eyes, as of an owl when muting. And he had a power of hiding his eyes, or showing them bright, like a blazing fire. He stood there with his beaver off, and mother tried to look at him, but he seemed not to descry her. "Counsellor," said Sir Ensor Doone, standing back in his height from him, "here is a lady of good repute—" "Oh, no, sir, only a woman." "Allow me, madam, by your good leave. Here is a lady, Counsellor, of great repute in this part of the country, who charges the Doones with having unjustly slain her husband." "Murdered him, murdered him!" cried my mother. "If ever there was a murder, oh, sir, you know it." "The perfect rights and truth of the case is all I wish to know," said the old man very loftily, "and justice shall be done, madam." "Oh, I pray you, sirs, make no matter of business of it. God from heaven look on me." "Put the case," said the Counsellor. "The case is this," replied Sir Ensor, holding one hand up to mother. "This lady's worthy husband was slain, it seems, upon his return from the market at Porlock, no longer ago than last Saturday night. Madam, amend me if I am wrong." "No longer, indeed, sir. Sometimes it seems a 12-month, and sometimes it seems an hour." "Cite his name," said the Counsellor, with his eyes still rolling inwards. "Master John Ridd, as I understand. Counsellor, we have heard of him often. A worthy man and a peaceful one, who meddled not with our duties. Now, if any of our boys have been rough, they shall answer it dearly. And yet I can scarce believe it, for the folk about these parts are apt to misconceive of our sufferings, and to have no feeling for us. Counsellor, you are our record, and very stern against us. Tell us how this matter was." "Oh, Counsellor," my mother cried, "Sir Counsellor, you will be fair, I see it in your countenance. Only tell me who it was, and set me face to face with him, and I will bless you, sir, and God shall bless you and my children." The square man with the long grey beard, quite unmoved by anything, drew back to the door and spoke, and his voice was like a fall of stones in the bottom of a mine. "Few words will be enow for this. 4 or 5 of our best behaved and most peaceful gentlemen went to the little market at Porlock with a lump of money. They bought some household stores and comforts at a very high price, and pricked upon the homeward road, away from vulgar revellers. When they drew bridle to rest their horses, in the shelter of a peat rick, the night being dark and sudden, a robber of great size and strength rode into the midst of them, thinking to kill or terrify. His arrogance and hardihood at the first amazed them, but they would not give up without a blow goods which were on trust with them. He had smitten 3 of them senseless, for the power of his arm was terrible, whereupon the last man tried to ward his blow with a pistol. Carver, sir, it was, our brave and noble Carver, who saved the lives of his brethren and his own, and glad enow they were to escape. Notwithstanding, we hoped it might be only a flesh wound, and not to speed him in his sins." As this atrocious tale of lies turned up joint by joint before her, like a devil's coach horse, mother was too much amazed to do any more than look at him, as if the earth must open. But the only thing that opened was the great brown eyes of the Counsellor, which rested on my mother's face with a dew of sorrow, as he spoke of sins. Author's note on Devil's Coach Horse. The cock-tailed beetle has earned this name in the west of England. She, unable to bear them, turned suddenly on Sir Ensor, and caught, as she fancied, a smile on his lips, and a sense of quiet enjoyment. "All the Doones are gentlemen," answered the old man gravely, and looking as if he had never smiled since he was a baby. "We are always glad to explain, madam, any mistake which the rustic people may fall upon about us. And we wish you clearly to conceive that we do not charge your poor husband with any set purpose of robbery, neither will we bring suit for any attainder of his property. Is it not so, Counsellor?" "Without doubt his land is attainted, unless is mercy you forbear, sir." "Counsellor, we will forbear. Madam, we will forgive him. Like enough he knew not right from wrong, at that time of night. The waters are strong at Porlock, and even an honest man may use his staff unjustly in this unchartered age of violence and rapine." The Doones to talk of rapine! Mother's head went round so that she curtsied to them both, scarcely knowing where she was, but calling to mind her manners. All the time she felt a warmth, as if the right was with her, and yet she could not see the way to spread it out before them. With that she dried her tears in haste, and went into the cold air, for fear of speaking mischief. But when she was on the homeward road, and the sentinels had charge of her, blinding her eyes, as if she were not blind enough with weeping, some one came in haste behind her, and thrust a heavy leathern bag into the limp weight of her hand. "Captain sends you this," he whispered. "Take it to the little ones." But mother let it fall in a heap, as if it had been a blind worm, and then for the first time crouched before God, that even the Doones should pity her. End of chapter 4. Recording by Michelle Harris. Of Lorna Doone. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Michelle Harris. Lorna Doone by R.D. Blackmore. Chapter 5. An Illegal Settlement. Good folk who dwell in a lawful land, if any such there be, may, for want of exploration, judge our neighbourhood harshly, unless the whole truth is set before them. In bar of such prejudice, many of us asked leave to explain how and why it was the robbers came to that head in the midst of us. We would rather not have had it so, God knows as well as anybody, but it grew upon us gently in the following manner. Only let all who read observe that here I enter many things which came to my knowledge in later years. In or about the year of our Lord 1640, when all the troubles of England were swelling to an outburst, great estates in the north country were suddenly confiscated, through some feud of families and strong influence at court, and the owners were turned upon the world, and might think themselves lucky to save their necks. These estates were in co-heirship, joint tenancy I think they called it, although I know not the meaning, only so that if either tenant died, the other living, all would come to the live one in spite of any testament. One of the joint owners was Sir Ensor Doone, a gentleman of brisk intellect, and the other owner was his cousin, the Earl of Lorne and Dykemont. Lord Lorne was some years the elder of his cousin Ensor Doone, and was making suit to gain severance of the cumbersome joint tenancy by any fair apportionment, when suddenly this blow fell on them by wiles and woman's meddling, and instead of dividing the land, they were divided from it. The nobleman was still well to do, though crippled in his expenditure, but as for the cousin, he was left a beggar, with many to beg from him. He thought that the other had wronged him, and that all the trouble of law befell through his unjust petition. Many friends advised him to make interest at court, for having done no harm whatever, and being a good Catholic, which Lord Lorne was not, he would be sure to find hearing there, and probably some favour. But he, like a very hot-brained man, although he had long been married to the daughter of his cousin, whom he liked none the more for that, would have nothing to say to any attempt at making a patch of it, but drove away with his wife and sons, and the relics of his money, swearing hard at everybody. In this way he may have been quite wrong, probably, perhaps he was so, but I am not convinced at all but what most of us would have done the same. Some say that, in the bitterness of that wrong and outrage, he slew a gentleman of the court, whom he supposed to have borne a hand in the plundering of his fortunes. Others say that he bearded King Charles the First himself, in a manner beyond forgiveness. One thing, at any rate, is sure. Sir Ensor was attainted, and made a felon outlaw, through some violent deed ensuing upon his dispossession. He had searched in many quarters for somebody to help him, and with good warrant for hoping it, inasmuch as he, in lucky days, had been open-handed and cousinly to all who begged advice of him. But now all these provided him with plenty of good advice, indeed, and great assurance of feeling, but not a movement of leg or lip or purse-string in his favour. All good people of either persuasion, royalty or commonalty, knowing his kitchen range to be cold, no longer would play turnspit. And this, it may be, seared his heart more than the loss of land and fame. In great despair at last, he resolved to settle in some outlandish part, where none could be found to know him, and so, in an evil day for us, he came to the west of England. Not that our part of the world is at all outlandish, according to my view of it, for I never found a better one, but that it was known to be rugged, and large, and desolate. And here, when he had discovered a place which seemed almost to be made for him, so withdrawn, so self-defended, and uneasy of access, some of the country folk around brought him little offerings, a side of bacon, a keg of cider, hung mutton, or a brisket of venison, so that for a while he was very honest. But when the newness of his coming began to wear away, and our good folk were apt to think that even a gentleman ought to work or pay other men for doing it, and many farmers were grown weary of manners without discourse to them, and all cried out to one another how unfair it was that owning such a fertile valley young men would not spade or plough by reason of noble lineage, then the young Doones growing up took things they would not ask for. And here let me, as a solid man, owner of 500 acres, whether fenced or otherwise, and that is my own business, churchwarden also of this parish, until I go to the churchyard, and proud to be called the parson's friend, for a better man I never knew with tobacco and strong waters, nor one who could read the lessons so well, and he has been at Blundell's too. Once for all let me declare that I am a thorough-going church and state man, and royalist, without any mistake about it. And this I lay down because some people, judging a sausage by the skin, may take in evil part my little glosses of style and glibness, and the mottled nature of my remarks and cracks now and then on the frying pan. I assure them that I am good inside, and not a bit of rue in me, only queer knots, as of marjoram, and a stupid manner of bursting. There was not more than a dozen of them, counting a few retainers who still held by Sir Ensor, but soon they grew and multiplied in a manner surprising to think of. Whether it was the venison, which we call a strengthening victual, or whether it was the Exmoor mutton, or the keen soft air of the moorlands, anyhow the Doones increased much faster than their honesty. At first they had brought some ladies with them, of good repute with charity, and then as time went on they added to their stock by carrying. They carried off many good farmers' daughters, who were sadly displeased at first, but took to them kindly after a while, and made a new home in their babies. For women, as it seems to me, like strong men more than weak ones, feeling that they need some staunchness, something to hold fast by. And of all the men in our country, although we are of a thick-set breed, you scarce could find 1 in 60 fit to be placed among the Doones, without looking no more than a tailor. Like enough we could meet them man for man, if we chose all around the crown and the skirts of Exmoor, and show them what a cross buttock means, because we are so stuggy. But in regard of stature, comeliness, and bearing, no woman would look twice at us. Not but what I myself, John Ridd, and 1 or 2 I know of, but it becomes me best not to talk of that, although my hair is grey. Perhaps their den might well have been stormed, and themselves driven out of the forest, if honest people had only agreed to begin with them at once when they first took to plundering. But having respect for their good birth, and pity for their misfortunes, and perhaps a little admiration at the justice of God, that robbed men now were robbers, the squires and farmers and shepherds at first did nothing more than grumble gently, or even make a laugh of it, each in the case of others. After a while they found the matter gone too far for laughter, as violence and deadly outrage stained the hand of robbery, until every woman clutched her child, and every man turned pale at the very name of Doone. For the sons and grandsons of Sir Ensor grew up in foul liberty, and haughtiness, and hatred, to utter scorn of God and man, and brutality towards dumb animals. There was only one good thing about them, if indeed it were good, to wit, their faith to one another, and truth to their wild eyrie. But this only made them feared the more, so certain was the revenge they wreaked upon any who dared to strike a Doone. One night, some 10 years ere I was born, when they were sacking a rich man's house not very far from Minehead, a shot was fired at them in the dark, of which they took little notice, and only one of them knew that any harm was done. But when they were well on the homeward road, not having slain either man or woman, or even burned a house down, one of their number fell from his saddle, and died without so much as a groan. The youth had been struck, but would not complain, and perhaps took little heed of the wound, while he was bleeding inwardly. His brothers and cousins laid him softly on a bank of whortleberries, and just rode back to the lonely hamlet where he had taken his death wound. No man nor woman was left in the morning, nor house for any to dwell in. Only a child with its reason gone. This vile deed was done, beyond all doubt. This affair made prudent people find more reason to let them alone than to meddle with them, and now they had so entrenched themselves, and waxed so strong in number, that nothing less than a troop of soldiers could wisely enter their premises. And even so it might turn out ill, as perchance we shall see by and by. For not to mention the strength of the place, which I shall describe in its proper order when I come to visit it, there was not one among them but was a mighty man, straight and tall, and wide, and fit to lift 400 weight. If son or grandson of old Doone, or one of the northern retainers, failed at the age of 20, while standing on his naked feet, to touch with his forehead the lintel of Sir Ensor's door, and to fill the door frame with his shoulders from side post even to side post, he was led away to the narrow pass which made their valley so desperate, and thrust from the crown with ignominy, to get his own living honestly. Now the measure of that doorway is, or rather was, I ought to say, 6 feet and 1 inch lengthwise, and 2 feet all but 2 inches taken crossways in the clear. Yet I not only have heard, but know, being so closely mixed with them, that no descendant of old Sir Ensor, neither relative of his, except indeed the counsellor, who was kept by them for his wisdom, and no more than 2 of their following ever failed of that test, and relapsed to the difficult ways of honesty. Not that I think anything great of a standard the like of that, for if they had set me in that door frame at the age of 20, it is like enough that I should have walked away with it on my shoulders, though I was not come to my full strength then. Only I am speaking now of the average size of our neighbourhood, and the Doones were far beyond that. Moreover, they were taught to shoot with a heavy carbine so delicately and wisely, that even a boy could pass a ball through a rabbit's head at the distance of 80 yards. Some people may think naught of this, being in practice with longer shots from the tongue than from the shoulder. Nevertheless, to do as above is, to my ignorance, very good work, if you can be sure to do it. Not one word do I believe of Robin Hood splitting peeled wands at 70 yards, and such like. Whoever wrote such stories knew not how slippery a peeled wand is, even if one could hit it, and how it gives to the onset. Now let him stick one in the ground, and take his bow and arrow at it, 10 yards away, or even 5. Now after all this which I have written, and all the rest which a reader will see, being quicker of mind than I am, who leave more than half behind me, like a man sowing wheat, with his dinner laid in the ditch too near his dog, it is much but what you will understand the Doones far better than I did, or do even to this moment. And therefore none will doubt when I tell them that our good justiciaries feared to make an ado, or hold any public inquiry about my dear father's death. They would all have had to ride home that night, and who could say what might betide them? Least said, soonest mended, because less chance of breaking. So we buried him quietly, all except my mother, indeed, for she could not keep silence, in the sloping little churchyard of Oare, as meek a place as need be, with the Lynn brook down below it. There is not much of company there for anybody's tombstone, because the parish spreads so far in woods and moors without dwelling house. If we bury one man in 3 years, or even a woman or child, we talk about it for 3 months, and say it must be our turn next, and scarcely grow accustomed to it until another goes. Annie was not allowed to come, because she cried so terribly, but she ran to the window and saw it all, mooing there like a little calf, so frightened and so left alone. As for Eliza, she came with me, one on each side of mother, and not a tear was in her eyes, but sudden starts of wonder, and a new thing to be looked at unwillingly, yet curiously. Poor little thing, she was very clever, the only one of our family, thank God for the same, but none the more for that guessed she what it is to lose a father. End of chapter 5. Recording by Michelle Harris.